Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Oathsworn Into the Deepwood from Shadowborn Games. Oathsworn Into the Deepwood is a adventure RPG boss hunting experience with a degree of story, a degree of, well, hunting down these giant creatures, of which we have this giant one over here. Now, this is, what you see in front of you, by the way, is the miniature version. There's a standee version, a miniature version, and there is going to be a second printing coming to Kickstarter. Now, this is a review slash first impressions. I'm several games in, not far enough to fully confidently call it a review, but far enough to say that it's more than first impressions, and Oathsworn Into the Deepwood may well be the greatest game ever to have existed. That's not my opinion, by the way. We'll get to my opinion. My opinion is positive, but that's just an objectively interesting conversation. You see, I'll go ahead and get into what Oathsworn is, what it does, what I like. This will not follow the format of my usual reviews. I'm going to be a little bit all over the place, which I guess is following the format of my reviews, but there's a lot going on in Oathsworn, but I want to spend the first 2 or 3 minutes talking about the current ratings on BoardGameGeek, because I think they are beyond impressive. Beyond impressive. Like I said, this may be the greatest game to ever have existed. You see, if you go over to BoardGameGeek and you check out what the highest rated game of all time, the answer is obviously Gloomhaven. Or technically that's the highest ranked game of all time, not necessarily the highest rated game. You see, BoardGameGeek uses a system where they try to ensure that in order to avoid a game having a single rating, if a game just comes out into existence and someone rates it a 10, well, now that game is now the highest rated game ever, because it has a 10 as its average, and it's only, but also its average. And so BoardGameGeek throws in a bunch of negative ratings or 0 ratings. I don't know their exact system, but they effectively throw in neutral or ratings to drag down the rating to ensure that you have to have a certain degree of critical mass before something rises to the top. And so a game that's rated a 10 with a single rating shows up as being rated a 10. Absolutely it does, but it doesn't actually rank that highly because it doesn't have that critical mass. Gloomhaven, with its like 50,000 ratings or whatnot, is currently coming in at an 8.69 rating on BoardGameGeek. An 8.69 out of 10 is what Gloomhaven is, and that is the #1 rated game of all time. And if you go ahead and you go over to BoardGameGeek and you go into that advanced search and you type into the box and you say, I want to see games that are ranked a 9 or above, and I want to see games that have a minimum of 1,000 ratings, because obviously we do want to ensure that there's a degree of critical mass here, only 2 games pop up, if you exclude expansions. Only 2 games pop up. One is the Anachrony Infinity Box, which is technically an expansion in its own right because it has that degree of, it's a follow-up. It's already being rated on by the people who wanted that game. But even then, the most impressive part is the highest rated game on BoardGameGeek is a 9.28, and that game is Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. With something like 1,400 ratings so far, this game comes in at a 9.28. There's not a higher rating that I can find that has that degree of critical mass. And so yes, it hasn't yet hit the top 100 on BoardGameGeek. I think it's something like 500 or somewhere there. But it certainly has that aspect of, if you're trying to find a game, if you're trying to find that critical mass of having 1,400 ratings and not 1 rating, this game is the highest rated game on BoardGameGeek that has 1,000 ratings or more by a long shot. By a long shot, it's not even close. It's a 9.28 on BoardGameGeek. None of this is my opinion, by the way. I like this game. I do. That's not the point. The point is that if you're looking for a game that has a degree of critical buy-in, this game certainly has it. Now, you do want to be mindful. The general nature of anything on ratings is ratings are always skewed by any number of things, including people who spent $250 on this game and want to heavily invest themselves in the fact that this is the greatest game of all time. And so there is that bias. But that bias and all the biases exist left, right, and center. But if you're just looking for a degree of a lot of people who love this game, and if you're looking at the ratings and reviews of people who have covered this game, overall, Oathsworn has certainly been an absolutely smashing success. And I'm curious to see where it goes from here. I'm curious to see where this game goes, in the sense that this game is going to continue to have more copies arriving to backers. It's going to continue to have that second printing. It's going to continue to circulate. And I don't know whether there's a retail option or not, but if they ever do have a retail option, then Gloomhaven better watch out, because this game does seem primed to be an option to compete with it as the #1 game of all time once it gets that critical mass in play. This is a very roundabout long way of just saying this game is well received, and I thought it was an interesting enough conversation to be covering a game that is that highly recognized. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into my actual opinion of the game, the actual game itself. What is this game doing? How does it operate? And the general idea is Oathsworn, like I said already, is a story-driven game. You're going to have, I have the board set up in front of me. I don't really have the story part set up. This is one of those things where you'll have like maps and encounters. I'm not really spoiling much. This is all from the first scenario, but you're going to have these maps. You're going to have your storybook that you're going through with all these different options and engagement that you're going to have. as you make choices, as you go from location to location, as you make decisions as far as how you interact with the world around you, all of which will eventually lead you to actually having the encounter. Now, there are ways to kind of skip all this. There are ways to go through the chapter book and kind of just set yourself up for that particular encounter, grabbing whatever you need to have that one shot as you're going through it. So this is a campaign game that is structured in a way where you could have a one shot if and where you want, or you could dive into the story making choices as you proceed through it. But it's a game that the game is alternated between those two branches. That story path where you're making decisions, you're going through an adventure book, you're leveling up your crew, you're gathering extras, you're gathering items, you're prepping yourself for better death conditions, any number of different things that are going on in the experience, and then eventually heading down into that combat. Eventually heading down into that boss monster kind of situation where you and your characters, your 4 characters on the board, are going to start slowly but surely closing in around the beast and trying to take it out. Now, there's a lot going on here. We're not heavily going to get into everything. Anything from the fact that these are push-to-fit miniatures with swappable armor pieces in case you want that. If you want to like pull out their hands over here and put in different armors as you get different gear, if you bought that armor pack, you have that opportunity. You're going to have options for the standee option that the base game comes with, or anything from these giant, ridiculous, over-the-top miniatures and bosses you'll be fighting against, different things that are all going to be around in the world around you on this map as you slowly hunt them down, as you set up the terrain different ways, as you have rats charging across the board into trees, knocking them down as you engage in that encounter system. And the general idea is you're going to have, well, tons of these characters to choose from. You're going to have any number of different characters to choose from, each with their own special ability, each with their own card systems, each with their own way that they're going to level up the cards and their stats and their abilities in play, but all the while going through a system where you're trying to use your characters and your abilities to ultimately take down that boss and then move your way into the next encounter, go to the next story beat, the next encounter beat, the next story beat, the next encounter beat, rinse and repeat, going through the adventure that is Oathsworn into the Deepwood. That's the high level of what this game is doing. The more in the weeds aspect are going to be anything from the way the card combat system works. So you're going to have your player board. You're going to have your player board over here, different sides around, and you're going to be playing cards into different regions on your player board. You'll see a 3, 2, 1, 0. And as you play cards cycle around your player board. So if you have a card in 2 and you play a card in 2, it cycles down to 1. And it's slowly going to push cards back to 0, will come back into your hand. Meanwhile, you're trying to be mindful of your animus, spending your animus in order to tower those cards, being mindful of the fact that the amount of animus you have and the amount you regenerate is not always the same thing, trying to utilize your special ability and your gear and equipment along the way, all while trying to figure out how you're going to actually deal with the boss, by which combination of cards will give you the movement you need, the abilities you need, the attacks you need to take down the boss, to take down their swarms, to take down any number of different things that are thrown in your direction. It has that intensity that Gloomhaven does in terms of managing your cards with a whole different system as you cycle cards around your board, eventually having them come back to your hand so you can rinse and repeat the cycle. The game has a strong AI system in which you can go ahead and control any number of characters, giving simple AI rules to the other characters not in play, giving you different options for how many characters you want to control and what level of intricacy you want. You could control four full human characters on your own if you wanted to, or you can control a single one and go ahead and throw in a bunch of AI generated one, or you can have a 2-player game, each controlling one full human, one AI. There's a number of different ways you can do it, but they all give you that different degree of strength to the system. The AI characters are easily run, quick to the table, and give you enough of a feeling of the character itself while giving you an easier to manage character. The game has an amazingly well done dice and card system in terms of how you push your luck in combat. It's very rewarding and surprisingly addicting, even though at first it kind of is like, why are we doing something like this? But effectively, whenever you are attacking, you're going to be going ahead and you'll have different levels of attacks, but you're going to choose from either different colored dice or alternatively different card decks you have, each of them with different stats through them. And when you choose through the cards, what you're doing is you're slowly going through the cards and you're slowly affecting the stats as you go. As you draw cards from the deck, whether more misses or more hits, you're going to have the opportunity to see how that deck evolves and iterates, because the problem is too many misses and you'll miss the entire attack, whereas the more dice you roll, the more you potentially can get those stronger overpowered attacks. So you roll things, and that's not the greatest attack over there, but you'll have more and more opportunities for how you'll be able to get larger and larger attacks, because you can always choose to push further and further into the attack sequence, rolling more dice, drawing more cards, with the risk factor that too many misses will cause you to miss entirely. So there's always that aspect, always that choice as far as how much you try to power through things. And the balance of trying to choose the static odds of the dice or the evolving and changing odds of the deck, those choices will change on an ongoing basis as you go through the system. And the fact that you're dealing with different monsters, different bosses, different ways that they're going to be defeated, different ways you're going to slowly take them down, different ways that they're going to escalate, because there is a degree of escalation as they power up and try to kill all of you. As you proceed to the next story arc, as you try to make those choices, as you go through that choose your own adventure arc, that is effectively everything going on in Oathsworn into the Deepwood. A story, an adventure, a story, an adventure, back and forth as you level up your characters, as you fight harder and harder creatures, as you try to figure out how to basically take everything down, how to survive with as few deaths as possible in your journey. Which brings us to the review. Starting off with what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. And as far as what I like here, and again, this isn't necessarily my full usual format, but starting off with what I like, there's a lot to like in Oathsworn. There's a lot to like. Starting off with the story. The story itself does pull you in and gives you a degree of investment in the story. We have complaints that we'll come back to those, but overall the story gives you a degree of investment in it. The fact that the story will eventually wind you up into these various town areas, and you'll start to making choices with a limited degree of time, limited degree of economy, as far as what to go, where to visit, who to go to, whether to gather armor, whether to visit the herbalist, whether to try to chase down that little story point that might help you as you start off your encounter. You have limited time, you're trying to make these choices, and that gives you more of a sense of agency as you go through this, assuming you do this instead of just skipping straight to the scenario modes. The card combat system gives you a lot of intricacy to it. The choices you're making as you choose where and how to play down your cards around the board, where and how to cycle around your boards as you try to make those decisions, as you try to figure out how to take down the beast, as you work with other players to stride confidently around the map. This map that remains fairly static past the scenery that goes on, but gives you a lot of choice as you go through it. The high degree of characters you have in the game, and there are a lot of characters in the game, and each of them giving you very different decks and very different abilities and very different play styles and different ways of upgrading them and developing them as the game goes on. There's a lot of tactical depth to the experience that Oathsworn gives you. Trying to figure out how to navigate around the creatures, trying to figure out learn the creature's patterns, and you will slowly learn the creature's patterns, how they like to attack, what different types of things they want to do, whether it's better to be in the front or the rear or the side or nowhere near them at all. You'll start to learn those things as you go through the creatures. You will have to learn sometimes by dying, but that's okay. And then the AI system, which I touched upon already, I think it's brilliantly well done, because controlling, at least speaking for myself, playing a two-player game of Oathsworn, where you're each controlling one full character and one AI character, that gives me a great degree of feeling of being able to experience one character that I'm really handling and really invested in their engine, and another one that gives me enough of a sense of general progression that I get a sense of what that character is. The AI characters are simpler but well balanced. I really like what they add to the game, and I'll easily choose them over controlling multiple fully fledged characters, and I like that system. I like the dice versus card combat, the different push your luck system they have, where you always have the ability to push yourself just a little bit further, to potentially rely on some of these skills or abilities you have in the game. And speaking of which, I like the animus system of the fact that as you go through the game, you always have those options for those stronger turns, because you often have more max capacity to your animus than your actual regeneration. So for example, this character starting off will have 8 capacity but 6 regeneration, so you can have those occasionally powerful turns, but also you can have those turns where you're laid back a bit more, where you spend a little less energy trying to do things, so you can power up for that one turn where you can completely and totally destroy and take down your enemies. I like the multiple use cards and the way they have different uses for them, from the fact that most of the cards do have multiple things you can do with them, but additionally you're playing the cards down to the different areas, trying to be mindful of which cards are better off being held in your hand, for which different abilities they're going to execute a trigger on. And most cards do have different abilities, whether they're being used offensively or for dice mitigation or different forms of defense or reactions. All the cards have different spots in terms of where they'll be most useful, and the game gives you a lot of sense of agency of controlling those characters, working together as a team to take down the big bads. Overall, this is a very well done monster hunting game that gives you a strong sense of story, a strong sense of progression, a strong sense of leveling up, a strong sense of strategy, just a whole lot of strong senses of everything that are being bundled up into the experience that Oathsworn gives. As far as what I don't like in the game, there are a few things. I'd say really just two things that are most notable for me. The first is the fact that this game is a lot. And by a lot, I mean this game literally is 4 giant boxes. That's what this game is, and I probably could condense it, but not necessarily without compromising on the mystery aspect. In general, the amount of stuff this game is giving you, you kind of have a choice. Do you really just heavily embrace one box and play a less bigger experience, or do you actually try to deal with the fact that there are 4 giant boxes to this game? This is a lot of game. I wish there were a way to have the sense of what this game is. I mean, on the table, this looks amazing, make no mistake. I like having these things. You could have just cardboard cutouts instead. I like having this here, but it comes at the cost of 4 giant boxes, and that is a big cost that is worth mentioning. This is not your travel to a buddy game night kind of game. This is very, very different. Secondly, I'll say that the story, one thing I've noticed multiple times throughout the story is that the choose-your-own-adventure that the story gives doesn't always feel quite as choose-your-own-adventure as I'd like. I can't speak for every single pathway because I haven't traced every single pathway, but multiple times throughout the story, I've gotten the sense that the choose your own adventure is almost a little bit artificial in nature, and ultimately they are winding you towards the pathway that they want, and the choices you make along the way seem artificial in nature, seem like they have minor impacts at best to the interactions. And once I started to notice that, the first time I noticed that, I was like, I hope that's not a continued thing. And as I played it more and started to notice more, I was like, I wonder just how deep this goes and how much agency there actually is. For the most part, I still like the choose your own adventure. I like the choices I'm making, but as I've realized more and more that many times those choices aren't actually choices and they're just going to end me up in the same place, that sense of agency has disappeared a bit, and I've been more and more inclined to start diving into various scenarios by just doing with the preset setup, because if the story doesn't really matter, if what I do here doesn't actually have that sense of agency, and to be fair, you do have a sense of agency, even just the board and how you interact with that will definitely have agency, make no mistake, but the story choices a little bit less so, and so maybe it's best to just read the little encounter book and skip all of that stuff. Maybe. I don't know. Overall, I still like the story. Overall, I'm still engaged with it. But it certainly has been less enjoyable as I've seen more and more different pathways arcing back in on themselves regardless of what you choose. As far as I can see others not liking, the card management system is a lot. Mentally speaking, the cards management system of trying to figure out how to cycle cards back and forth, it'll take a little bit to get the hang of it, and it's something that may be rewarding. I personally find the puzzle and challenge rewarding, and the extra abilities as far as how to cycle things to be enjoyable, but it may just be frustrating to have your best abilities on a constant cooldown timer. You may not enjoy that aspect of the game. Secondly, this game still does have that general boss hunting experience where very often a big part of the game is closing distance to the boss, striking it as hard as possible, rinse and repeat. There's a lot of agency and nuance to the decisions you're making along the way, but that core cycle is there. If that's a core cycle you don't like, I don't know if this game will change your mind. If you've played games like Teen Death Monster, like Wild Ascent, like Primal, if you've played any of these experiences and they haven't been for you, Oathsworn is still delivering that primary experience. I enjoy that primary experiences, some games less so than others, and so for me it definitely does come down to the nuance, but if across the board you haven't liked those experiences, I don't know if Oathsworn is going to change your mind. And then lastly, the push your luck system. I find it immensely enjoyable to always have that sense of I could just push a little harder. I can just get a little more damage done if I'm willing to risk it. I like that system. I like that sense of danger that the game provides you because I feel the choice is on me. How conservative do I want to be versus how not? But at the end of the day, good rules and bad rules do exist, and there are times where the statistics will just not favor you, and roll after roll will fail, and you'll continuously lose and die, and you'll have to reset. That is absolutely a risk of having a whole lot of your damage and attacks being dealt with throughout the course of the dice and the cards. As far as final thoughts on Oathsworn, I really enjoy this game. I really enjoy Oathsworn into the Deepwood. This game is doing a lot of things that are absolutely just not necessarily innovative. I don't know if there's any single aspect of Oathsworn I can point to as innovative. Maybe the dice versus the cards and the way they handle that. Maybe the AI characters, the way they give you such ridiculously well-developed AI characters. Maybe those I can point to as being a little bit more innovative. But past that, I don't think Oathsworn is doing a lot that's innovative. I think Oathsworn is doing a lot that's polished. I think Oathsworn is giving us a great story, great choose your own adventure with that caveat, great degree of monster hunting and agency and different feelings of those bosses and the sense of escalation it gives you. Oathsworn overall is a game that I have enjoyed every minute of it, and everyone I know who's played it has enjoyed every minute of it. Not necessarily every minute, I should be mindful of the hyperbole. Oathsworn is a game that has been well received by myself and the people I know that have played it, and for good reason. And it gives you a smoothly polished experience. That whole 5-minute tangent I spent talking about the fact that this is a 9.28 on Board Game Geek with 1,400 ratings compared to the 8.69 that Gloomhaven is. And I think Gloomhaven is fantastic, make no mistake. But Oathsworn is really, really, really well done. It's an incredibly well-designed game. For me, it's a 4.5 out of 5. I like it a lot in terms of the things that it's doing. I like the variety of characters. I like the variety of scenarios, the variety of encounters. I think most of the elements that it does are just well done and polished. The rulebook is not that long for the degree of what the game is doing. There are 2 different rulebooks. You have to go through the story and the encounter and all that, so you have to learn different things there. But overall, if you are looking for your next campaign experience, if you're looking for your next boss hunting experience, your next story-driven experience, Oathsworn is absolutely one to pay attention to. There's going to be an upcoming Kickstarter for it. It's worth paying. It's worth keeping your eyes on that because your alternative right now is the secondhand market, and the prices there are absolutely not kind. I'm not saying Oathsworn is for you, but I am saying Oathsworn has been for a lot of people. And if this is something that appeals to you, I think it's worth checking out. If you're looking for other game recommendations, I'm going to start with the one I already mentioned, which is Gloomhaven. I adore Gloomhaven. I love Gloomhaven. I've been going through a absolute blast playing through it. I prefer the card combat system of Gloomhaven, while not thinking that the story is really present in Gloomhaven, so pros and cons to both, but Gloomhaven is absolutely worth checking out if you like the experience that Oathsworn is. And secondly, Madara. I haven't actually played Madara yet, but if we're talking about big box epic campaign games, it would be hard to not lump that into the category here as another one worth checking out. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.